Hey, this is the InDesign Helper, and today we are going to look at every single tool in the toolbar. We're going to do this as smoothly as we can. First, we're going to talk about the selection tool. If you are aware of other programs in Adobe, such as Photoshop or Illustrator, some of these tools are similar, but there's a good amount that is only exclusive in InDesign. So we have the selection tool. Gosh, where the fuck? Fuck. Okay. I don't even know why it's on. I need to uninstall it. Hey, this is the InDesign Helper. Today we are going to look at every single tool in InDesign. If you're familiar with Photoshop or Illustrator, some of these tools are going to look and do the exact same thing, but they are exclusive tools that you need to check out. Right over here, we have the selection tool. Now, the selection tool is like any other program. You just click, you could select, you could change the size and the bounds. You could select more than one. You could move them left and right. But let's not just focus on just this part of the selection. Let's look at the top over here. So if I select this square, as you could see, this part highlights. If I move it away, you don't see much. Over here, I see an X and Y axis. So for the X and Y axis, this basically means the position that is on in the document. If you see this P, this is picas. So I have it in picas, and you could actually change the units if you want to. This is the actual height and width of the shape. So if we were to increase this, you'll see the height getting bigger, but you also see the width getting bigger because of this. This chain link keeps the integrity of the original size. So it was a square, so it would stay a square. But I could untick this, and I could increase the height again, and only the height changes, not the width. Right over here, you have the percentage of value of scaling. So think of it similar. Think of it being similar to changing the actual shape, but there's no reason to really use this. This is actually rotation. This is distortion or shearing it, basically changing it into a parallelogram. Now you also have default rotation. You could also flip vertically, and you could flip horizontally. Over here is a visualization of how it's being rotated. Now here we have the colors. Then we have stroke. We have the thickness of the stroke, and then we have the stroke style. Right over here, we could apply an effect. Here we have a drop shadow. Here we have different effects that we could use. Similar to Photoshop, we have the opacity. And we have the way that it's being placed on the document. So it could be around text, through text, on top of text. And this would be how how the corners will look and how rounded the corners are. If that's a lot of information, don't worry. I'm going to make a separate video for each of these tools, and you could check them out on the channel. After that, we have the direct selection tool, which is similar to the original selection tool, but you can specifically pick one of the points and you could mess around with it and rearrange it individually. You might need this if you're trying to create a custom shape and you're doing it from a default shape. Next, we have the Artboard tool. Basically, this changes the document size and orientation of the artboard that we have. Right over here, we could change the size using the defaults. Change the orientation. We could have the liquid page rule. Usually I keep it controlled by master. I'll go in more detail later. Objects move with page. Basically, if I were to move this over, then it would the objects would move with it. And then show master page overlay. I recommend you turn that off. Next, we have the gap tool. This tool has been actually a lifesaver. Basically, what the gap tool does is it looks at the space between objects or the document, as you could see. And once you see a highlight, you could click and drag, and it basically moves it based on the space that it has. And this is really helpful for when you're doing magazine covers and editorials, which is what InDesign is all about. And you could easily create different layouts to your liking. Over here, you have the content collector. This is nothing you need to worry about. This is something more advanced, nothing a beginner needs to know. Over here, you have the type tool, similar to any other type tool. The difference is if I were just to click, you can't create a text box. You have to click and drag to make a text box, and now you could type. What I would say, something that you should use on a almost everyday basis if you're using InDesign, is to right click, go all the way down, and fill with placeholder text. I always fill it with placeholder text so I know how it looks with something in it, and it makes it easier to create a layout without having the information in. And then you also have type on a path, which means that I can go on this rectangle, and once I see the plus, I could click the plus, and now I could type around it. And that could be very useful to create very custom layouts and designs. We also have the line tool. And the basic pen tool. We could also individually add, delete, or convert an anchor. We also have the pencil tool, which is a more freehand version of the pen tool. We have the smooth tool to smoothen the edges of the pencil, and we have an erase tool. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking, okay, why are there two rectangles? Well, if you see an X through it, this is the rectangle frame tool. This is used when you have an image. So when you're making a layout, you want to distinguish the difference between an object and an image. And the way you do that is by having an X. When you have that X, that is a filler shape for an image, not for a shape. So it makes it easier and it helps you organize, but it works just the same. So you don't even have to worry whether you pick one or the other. It's just something to keep in mind if you're making a lot of pages and you want to be very organized, which is important in InDesign. And here you have Polygon or the ellipse frame. Over here you have the same thing. It's just without the X, and you use this more for just having shapes. Of course, you could change the color, the rotation. You could distort it, shearing. You could rotate it, decrease, increase the size, just like what you could do before. Now, over here we have the scissors tool. I don't usually use the scissors tool. I haven't found it helpful yet, but it might be helpful to you. Basically what it does is, if we zoom in here, you'll see that it turns into a crosshair. That's where you click. See that blue mark? That right there is where we clicked. And then if I were to go over here, and I clicked, and I go to the selection tool, you'll see that I actually cut my shape. So that's exactly what it does. It cuts your shape from point A to point B, and then it separates it. Right over here, you have the Shear tool. Shear tool is basically the same function as this over here. It's just separate. Then you also have the rotate tool. This I like because for the rotate tool, I could add the anchor point of which is being rotated, and then I click, and now I'm able to rotate it at any point, which makes it much easier. Of course, you have to select the image that you're wanting to rotate first, but this makes it much more free to rotate. And then you also have the scale tool. So all you have to do is click and drag that. And of course, the way it rotates, that anchor point is saved from when you're scaling, but you could always move it around by going back to the rotate tool. Over here, you have the gradient swatch tool. Basically, you create a gradient on what you select, and you could change the gradient. You could have different swatches, but that's up to you. Then over here, you have the gradient feather tool, which is the same thing, but as you can see, it tries to blend it into the background, which is really good for when you want to do some slight effects and photo manipulation, but you're not in Photoshop. Over here, you just have the color theme, eyedropper, and the measure tool. Eyedrop is what you think it does, just does what it usually does. Then you have the hand tool, move around if you have multiple pages in your document. Then you have the zoom tool. You can zoom in, you can zoom out. And then you have the color swatches. And you could swap the fill. And lastly, I'm just going to show you this. You see how it says normal? You have preview. Preview is how it's going to look once you print it out. So basically, if you always want to switch back and forth, you could easily do that, or you could press W on your keyboard. And this is showing it with bleed if we had bleed. This is showing if we had slug. And then this is showing if we have presentation. Or you could press Shift W. And these are the rulers, edges, smart guides. I leave these as it is because it's very helpful to keep on. And that is all of the tools in Adobe InDesign.